However, you will not be recorded as long as you stay muted and don't talk into your microphone. Only those of us in these lovely yellow boxes are being recorded, so don't worry about that. And when we come to the audience question and answer portion of the evening, or really at any point through the event, if you have a question that you would like to ask our authors, just go ahead and type it into the chat, and then when we get to the end of the event, Dafydd and I will pose it for you. And then before I turn things over to Dafydd to introduce our author this evening, one last note, which is that in these wild times for small businesses, we are asking you to please consider shopping early and shopping local at independent businesses that you love this holiday season. Not just us, but other businesses that you love. Please support them with your holiday shopping and get that done as early as you can to help us with supply chain issues and all sorts of shenanigans that may be coming our way. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here, and I'm going to turn things over to Dafydd to introduce our authors this evening.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. It's a real pleasure to be back, and it is my great pleasure to welcome back to Northshire Live Ted Williams, who will be presenting EARTH ALMANAC, a year of witnessing the wild, from the call of the loon to the journey of the gray whale. It's a beautiful collection of short seasonal essays. Ted Williams writes full-time on fish and wildlife issues in a monthly recovery column for the Nature Conservancy's Cool Green Science and in various other publications. A longtime contributor to Audubon magazine, Williams was recognized by the Outdoor Writers Association of America as the nation's best outdoor columnist, and has received numerous other national writing and conservation awards. He serves as a national chair of the Native Fish Coalition and lives in Grafton, Massachusetts. And we're lucky to be joined in this literary conversation by Connie Isbell, a former editor and writer at Audubon magazine, as well as the editor of numerous books and the author of Rabbits for Dummies. Please welcome to Northshire Live, Connie Isbell and Ted Williams.
Good to be with you.
Hi, everyone.
I should point out that Connie was my editor for all these essays in Audubon. I could not have done it without her. She thought of the topics, and it was very challenging because not only did she have to think of this particular season, but the location. We couldn't just have it in the East, stuff that we knew about. We had to do the Southwest and the Northwest and the Deep South. So all these ideas came from Connie, and I just did the grunt work.
Well, I don't know about that, but thank you, Ted. It was a pleasure.
When I started, about 1980, I started a column with Audubon magazine. It originally was called Echo Opinion, and then it morphed into Insight, INCITE. And it was a feature-length column, 3,500 words, muckraking about all the stuff that was wrong that we needed to fix. And that stuff was important, but too much of it, study diet as a prescription for burnout. And I wanted to do something that was just fun and focused readers on magic and beauty of nature, stuff they could see sometimes in their own backyard. I wanted to train advocates and activists, but I thought that would come later once they focused on this good stuff. And it was a retreat for me. We spent maybe a couple of weeks researching and writing this stuff. That was just fun to get out and get away from the terrible stuff that was happening. But I'm old enough to remember how bad things were in the 70s. In 1970, I went to work for the Massachusetts Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. And things were terrible. We didn't have an Endangered Species Act. We didn't have a National Environmental Policy Act, no Clean Water Act, no Clean Air Act. DDT was being blitzed all over the country. I had not seen a bluebird until I was 21 years old. So we kind of forget all the good stuff that's been happening. That's another mission of this column. I wanted to point out the stuff that gets overlooked because it's important to report that stuff. The environmental organizations, I don't blame them for this, but they have to focus on the critical stuff, the bad stuff that needs to be fixed, fundraising. And as a result, all the good news gets overlooked, or a lot of it gets overlooked. So I wanted to focus on that. And when you as I reread the manuscript, I'm impressed by how many things have improved. Bald eagles, for example. And we have a lake in southern New Hampshire with an island camp on it. When I was a kid, it was unheard of to see a bald eagle. Can't spend a week up there without seeing at least 2 bald eagles. Loons were never there, never did you see a loon. Now we have nesting loons every summer. You hear them all night long. Never saw a pileated woodpecker back then. You can't go out in the woods and not hear one, or at least hear one. Often see one. Fisher, cats, we didn't have any fish. They were trapped out. We have them in our backyard now in Grafton. Otters were almost trapped out. They've come back big time. So there's a lot of really good stuff that's happening. And I wanted to focus a lot on that. And I hope I succeeded in getting people feeling a little bit more upbeat. Maybe I should just read something from the introduction that kind of encapsulates what I just said. I'm convinced that these regular retreats into what is pure and clean and right with the world have made me a better environmental reporter, as they have reminded me of what's at stake and what I'm fighting for. They also have reminded me the crusade for healthy native ecosystems is far from hopeless, and that good news abounds. As you read this book, pay careful attention to the many species that have recovered from desperate trouble or continue to do well, or at least hold their own in a world in which the general assumption is that everything has gone to hell. Even now, as I reread, I find the good news remarkable and uplifting. These victories are more than isolated events. They result from new ways of thinking and new ways of responding to wildlife emergencies. Together, they prove that humans can undo the damage they've done and restore the planet. What's more, they indicate that humans can prove themselves to be successful species by living in harmony with their own habitat and with other life forms. Maybe if we can save gray whales and striped bass, we can save ourselves. I like to think that EARTH Almanac has helped bring a balance to all my writing, and I hope it has provided and will continue to provide sustenance to a campaign I've been part of since 1970, and I now believe we are winning.
That's great. So are we going to talk now, or were you going to?
Sure.
Yeah, should we start chatting?
Probably have some questions for me, Connie.
Yeah, we'll get to those. I do. I wanted to talk a little bit about our process for everyone who's taken a look at this. It really was, like Ted mentioned, a challenge to not only break things down by season, but also to make sure we were covering the whole country. And Ted being from Massachusetts and my roots are in upstate New York, we were kind of partial to our neck of the woods, so to speak. So it was a bit of a challenge to make sure that we were covering different areas of the country. And our process really was digging around, coming up with ideas, lots of lists. And I think I would usually propose maybe 10 or so ideas for Ted each issue of Audubon magazine. And we'd narrow it down, and some would get shot down because they just weren't good enough. Ted had some pretty high standards, just to make sure that there was enough to say. And the nice thing about what we did, Ted, was you had a nice cadre of experts around the country. So even if it was a species or an event that you hadn't experienced yourself, do you want to talk a little bit about the network that you had at your disposal?
well, there's not much to say, except I did have a lot of friends, biologists that I interviewed for other articles. So I'd maybe call 5 or 6 of them and they'd fill me in, and they might send me a few links to research articles. And, we gradually got it done. The hard part for me was cutting copy to fit the space. Audubon in those days had a lot of space, and they were generous. They gave us a big 2-page spread with lavish illustrations, but we still had to cut a lot of copy to fit in. That was hard. For this book, all the copy that I cut, space, I've restored. So people who may have seen the column in Audubon are going to read a lot more that they haven't seen in this book here.
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking back to some of the items would be as 2 or 3 paragraphs, and I know from experience in magazine editing, and it's hard to cut an article that's 3,000 words down by 200 words. So when we were getting down to really short pieces, and every word mattered, and especially when you're choosing them so carefully to really describe what's going on with the species and put a little background info in there. And so, yeah, you're right. That really was a challenge. Do you remember having a favorite season to write about?
I do, and it's for me. And I should probably just read you a couple of paragraphs from the introduction about fall fever.
All right. So you said fall was your favorite? Sorry, I missed the beginning.
Yeah, fall, yeah.
Okay.
While not immune to spring-induced giddiness, members of the Williams family are far more afflicted with previously undescribed malady called fall fever. We feel the first symptoms on those crisp mornings just prior to the autumnal equinox, when morning glories open and the lattice work along the south garden wall, when our lake falls silent save for the lapping of waves and the gobbling of northern ducks, when aspens and tamaracks go smoky gold, swamp maples blaze, and the azure sky is one shade richer than at any other time of year. Fall brings the fragrance of wood smoke and leaf smoke, the sweet rotten scent of frost-killed ferns and deer-bitten apples, young grouse and the touch-me-nots, woodcocks fluttering moth-like in the bare alder runs at dusk, wild geese barking as if from treetop level, and yet so high they look like they're ribbons of crepe tacked to the corners of the crescent moon. As Joni Mitchell and our friend Tom Rush sing, they've got the urge for going and I've got the wings to go. Migrations of geese and other waterfowl are noticed by most people, even those generally oblivious to other natural things in the world. But the greatest migrations on Earth pass unseen by all but a few thousand Americans. They happen not with mammals on old world steppes, or savannas, or even with birds along busy flyways, but with sea creatures underwater along our west and east coasts.
Very nice. It's great hearing you. It's great hearing this in your own voice after all this time.
Probably the greatest migrations in the world anywhere happen out of Montauk, New York, where I go fishing a lot for false albacore. And everything swims by there because it sticks out furthest into the Atlantic. You have whales and porpoises, leatherback sea turtles, loggerhead sea turtles, sharks, and some 5 species of tuna fish, wahoos, jacks, and a lot of it's unseen except for those of us who are out there fishing, and it's really pretty spectacular.
Yes, I remember you always talking about that area and the albacore.
Right.
Not your favorite fish though.
Well, it's my favorite fish to catch, but it's the worst tasting fish in the ocean.
Okay,
it's absolutely vile, which is good because nobody's bothering them. So it's all catch and release, and there's no big commercial fishery for them.
That's good.
It's just a fun thing.
But for eating, the favorite fish is?
Favorite fish for eating is, I'll probably have a couple.
Okay,
Yellow perch is up there, brook trout,
brook trout.
and green bonito, Atlantic bonito, which are oddly a very close relative of false albacore. And they look a lot like them, act a lot like them, and yet they're delicious, and false albacore are absolutely vile.
Yeah. Well, that was always a challenge because when there were things that were we wanted to write about, but we knew no one would ever have a chance, or very few people would have a chance to see them. You know, you really have to tell the story and describe it in a captivating way, and you had such a knack for that.
Well, you're a great editor. I was glad you with me because you dissuaded me from having everything in the East, stuff that I knew about. And you constantly said, "Oh, we have to branch out, and you have to do, for example, candlefish in the Pacific Northwest. A fish that's so full of oil it can actually be used as candles.
That's
You
right.
want to wick through them and burn them. That's what the old settlers used to do."
I remember that one.
Yeah.
And then, what else did I wanted to ask you? I was gonna say winter was, for me, coming up with ideas, the biggest challenge. Even though I'm from upstate New York and I love winter, I'm one of the few people in New Jersey, I think, that looks forward to winter. Everyone else is just waiting to get through it for the beach. But you taught me a lot about winter, things that I hadn't noticed. I remember snow fleas, springtails.
Ringtail, yeah.
That was a good one to tell people about.
You hear about the dead of winter, and that's a misnomer.
Yes.
There's a lot going on in winter, but it's not like spring where you're just overwhelmed. Everything's happening at once. The same with fall when the migrations come back through. But winter, it's out there. You have to look for it. And you mentioned springtails, really interesting insect. One of the oldest insect orders in the world. They're 300 million years old, wingless. They live by the millions in forests of duff. And when the snow comes, they will, on a relatively warm winter day, say 38 degrees, they'll burrow up through the snow and graze on the algae on top of the snow. And it looks like somebody took a bag of pepper and just strewn it all over the snow. The reason they're called springtails is if you get down really close and watch them, they'll spring 6 inches into the air with a little spring on their tail. That's the equivalent of a human being jumping over a 4-story building.
Right.
These are the things that you're apt to miss if you don't look in the wintertime. We're in the Northeast where Connie and I live. We have a lot of birds that leave us, migratory birds, and go south. You forget sometimes that we're south of a lot of northern birds. So as birds are leaving, other birds in the north that we don't see are coming down this time of year, especially lusty blackbirds, for example, look just like grackles, except without the long tail. Juncos, snowbirds, they're called, they come down. Snow bunting, redpolls, crossbills, snowy owls, even where they don't find many lemmings north, they'll come down as far as Jersey. In Massachusetts, they hang out a lot of Logan Airport, which mimics their tundra habitat. Look for the wings of raptors, snow prints in the snow, where they've attempted or succeeded in catching a rodent. Might even see a spot of blood. Rough grouse in the winter grow snowshoes. You can actually, if you look for the tracks, you can see the progression of growth of the snowshoes as winter progresses. And to keep warm, sometimes they burrow under the snow, where it's never less than 32 degrees. And several times I've stepped on and they blasted up and sprayed snow on my face. That really gets your attention. So look for all these things. Look for brackens. We had a couple essays on the tree fungus that you can collect. You're not hurting the plant because the main plant is rotten wood. And you can collect them. Some are beautiful. You can collect them. The artist fungi, they're the biggest ones, and you can actually draw on them. And when hardens, those drawings will last forever. Where I go fishing in Canada, the lady at the camp, she's an really good artist. Lynn Parkin is her name. And she would carve these gorgeous animals into artist fungi. And whenever I'd go up, if I brought a friend, I'd point them out to this beautiful sketching of a black deer on this fungi. And one day I went up there and it wasn't there. So I confronted her. I said, "Where is it? We're really disappointed. I want to see this thing." And she pointed to a package labeled Ted. So she had given it to me. And now on my mantle in New Hampshire.
That's great. Love that. When we were talking about winter, it reminded me, I think you wrote something about trying to get your family out in the winter and to keep in mind to, lower expectations.
Right.
That's not going to be like spring, but you'll see some things, but just lower your expectations. So it's going to be a quieter experience.
And when you bring kids out, you shouldn't say, "We're going to go for a nature walk." That sounds too much like a lesson.
Yes.
Use subterfuge. Say, "We're going to go ice fishing." It's amazing what you see on the ice. It doesn't have anything to do with fish. Or go play broom ball on a pond. These are the things that get kids focused on nature when they think they discover it themselves. It is amazing what you see in the winter. I'm on ice, for instance. One time before fishers were common again, I was walking with my Brittany puppy on a lake, and it was kind of misty, and this huge fisher, the biggest one I've ever seen before, since just sauntered out of the swamp and almost ran over my toes. I expected him to tell me to get the hell out of his way, and my puppy wanted to play, and I had to dive in the ice and grab his hind feet because the fisher would not have appreciated that game.
No.
4 eagles would come. I remember the day walking on the ice. It was misty, and a bald eagle flew over our heads about 30 feet. Really memorable. One time I was on the ice, and I saw a musk turtle on the ice. Why would a musk turtle be on the ice? And I carried him back and put him in this little margin of water by the edge of the pond, in the back of the water. And I saw another one. Then I went looking for him. I saw 2 more. And I thought about it. And the only explanation I could come up with is herring gulls will pick up a shell and drop it on a rock to open it. I'm sure you've seen that. And I know they do the same with turtles in the summer because I've seen broken turtles on rocks in the lake. And I think that's what they did, except the ice was mushy and soft and it didn't hurt the turtles any. It didn't succeed. So
The turtle bounced.
those turtles survived. Those are just some of the things you can see. Keep your eyes open and get a track guide. That's not an important thing to have because you won't see a lot of these animals. You see their tracks in the snow.
Yes.
And a track guide will tell you exactly what animal has been wandering over your property or nearby land.
I'm looking behind me because this little stack of books has some of the books that I used to use when we were working on our column. So I have Nature and Winter, an old book called The Handbook of Nature Study, a few bird books, of course, because we were Audubon.
Right.
But yes, definitely tracks, a good mushroom guide. Don't eat any of those mushrooms, but a good mushroom guide. But speaking of kids and books, I know that you had, I don't know if it was an actual journal or just notebooks around, but didn't you with your own children keep a list of firsts? So the first of the season, it was kind of
Right.
a tracking, an
We
annual
did.
list.
We kept life lists. So if we went out on an expedition,
Okay.
we'd record everything we see. And I remember Beth wanted to record a dead squirrel. No, that doesn't count. It has to be alive. And all that stuff. But then they'd notice it. Big kick to write it down, bring it home, and that would be their list. I remember one time, Beth was in the second grade, and she saw the first turkey vulture of the year fly over her house.
Right.
She was all excited, so she told Mrs. Smith, her teacher, that she'd seen a turkey vulture. And Mrs. Smith said, no, there's no turkey vultures in Massachusetts. I said, but I saw one that was a turkey vulture. No, okay, she said. And then that winter, Mrs. Smith said, by the way, kids, there's no Santa Claus. And Beth came home devastated. And I said, Beth, of course, Mrs. Smith doesn't believe in Santa Claus. She doesn't even believe in turkey vultures. That solved that little problem.
Good. That's good. So do you have tips for other people who maybe want to start keeping track? Is it just, what are your tips? What advice do you have for people who want to get started with this?
Well, a track guide is important, and put up bird feeders. Birds really don't need us to feed them. Really for us, not them. But you see a lot of cool stuff in the wintertime. Bluebirds, for example, have changed their habits, as have robins. So a lot of them stay around all winter. And what they eat, they can't get bugs in the winter, so they eat winterberry holly. So we plant huge clumps of winterberry holly, and the bluebirds chow down on them, along with the cedar waxwings and the robins, the starlings. But about mid-December, they clean out, all these birds clean out the winterberries. So what Don and I do is we cut a few and save them, and we put the winterberries in a bowl and add mealworms.
Oh, right.
So the bluebirds find them and eventually wean them onto just mealworms. The robins and starlings chow down on the mealworms, and that's expensive. So then put the dish in a bird cage with a bluebird-sized hole in the top, a little branch in there for a perch. The bluebirds will learn to go down there. That keeps out the robins and starlings. Cedar waxwings, for some reason, don't go in. They could fit.
Right. That sounds like a project.
It is. And we put up bluebird boxes in our field. Because we feed the bluebirds mealworms, they have a tremendous advantage and head start in the spring.
Okay.
For a lot of their nest competitors, like house sparrows, start nesting, they will run off perhaps one brood. Another good news thing that I didn't mention is tree swallows. They've come back big time because they can use the bluebird boxes. They can fit in there. And their main competitors like bluebirds, starlings, and they can't. So we have, we probably fledge 2 broods of birds, or 3 broods of tree swallows every spring.
I missed that last section.
Well, the swallows, use the bluebird houses. And that's why they're doing very well.
Great.
Another thing I tried to get out in the book was the biologists have a lot of things right, but sometimes they get things wrong. And one of the things they got wrong is playfulness among mammals. And I'll just read you a real short section. Humans and wildlife, particularly our fellow mammals, are not so dissimilar as we like to suppose. We share many characteristics, the urge to play, for example. Biologists have proclaimed that playfulness in wild canids, ungulates, bears, cats, mustelids, and rodents is merely practice for serious adult activities such as battles over territory or social hierarchy. This may be true, but from my observations of the wild, I have no doubt that sometimes playfulness is just playfulness. That is, wild animals, like humans, play to have fun. Consider the essay Winter Games, in which I report the following. An otter will pluck a pebble from the bottom of a river or lake, surface with it, drop it, swim under it, catch it on its forehead, slip and turn back to the surface with the pebble still in place, and start the game anew. Now, what useful activity could otters possibly be practicing this game? Swimming, agility, I doubt it. They need this exercise about as much as professional baseball players need T-ball sets. Otters, like lots of other creatures, including us, simply enjoy sport. To deny this is not only unscientific, it diminishes wildlife and the wonders of nature. And I mentioned tree swallows. When the tree swallows nest, they'll bring back this brood from the previous year. So all of those birds will help raise the next brood. And when they're not feeding the babies, they play a game. And they'll take a feather, fly up about 500 feet, drop the feather, and catch it on the way down. Drop it again, another bird will catch it until it almost touches the ground. They'll fly up and start it over. Now, what could this possibly be practicing? These are birds that can catch dragonflies on the wing. They don't need this practice. They do it because it's fun.
Absolutely. You were talking about scientists, how they get some things right. One of the things that I think people appreciate or will appreciate in your writing is that it's scientific and precise. I think maybe Verlin says it this way, but it doesn't have the jargon that can bog some environmental writing down. For those of us who love nature and the wild, but don't want to get into Latin names and scientific terms, was that ever a problem for you? Were you torn? Because I know you're a guy who likes facts and wants, you want to keep things.
No, I think at Audubon there was kind of a religion, and Roger Cohn was a major proponent of it, of no jargon, no mumbo jumbo, and you were as well. So we all kind of learned to avoid that at all costs, and you don't need it, not for essays like this.
Right. There's a place for it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And we always did want Earth Almanac to be a place where you could chill out and write about things that that you needed to write about without the pressures. I know writing Insight and the environmental reporting that you did, it's emotionally grueling at times, right? So yeah, just keeping that relaxed feeling about the text, and make it a guide for people to enjoy nature and inspire their own experiences. Do you feel like what's the importance of a book like this right now, with what we're all, at least in this half of the country, with winter, or like real winter coming? What's the importance of a book like this?
What I hope the importance is again, training advocates and activists, exposing them to the beauty and wonders of nature. When they see it and appreciate it, they're going to want to defend it. And there's a lot of ways they can do that. The most important way is to vote for candidates who value and protect the environment and fish and wildlife.
Absolutely. Everybody vote. Let's see. I've gone over those guys. Did you have any other sections that you wanted to read? I was thinking about the idea. We did have some challenges along the way where we didn't really want to write too much about non-native species, though they're out there and they can be a pleasure to encounter in the wild. And we did do some of that. Do you?
I can remember a couple that we wrote about, but maybe we talked about Montauk and the Great Migrations. So maybe I should read a short section on false albacore, since that's that's my favorite ocean fish.
It is.
And, you had to dissuade me from writing about that more than 2 or 3 times. But
that sounds good.
Little Connie, aka false albacore, patrol tropical and subtropical waters on both sides of the Atlantic. But when ocean temperatures peak in late summer, they stream north as far as Maine and Great Britain in shimmering elliptical shoals that can cover 2 miles on the long axis. Most people, even experienced anglers, think they're bluefish or striped bass. Watch for their sickle tails and geysers of spray as these mini tunas swill bay anchovies and other bait fish. Often, the school is attended by a cloud of screaming terns and gulls that dip and dive for leftovers. Few of these short-lived, fast-growing fish weigh more than 15 pounds. When they take your fly, they'll have 50 yards of line off the reel before you can snatch your bruised knuckles from the spinning handle. At the neck of the eastern funnel, the inshore rips at Montauk, New York. My friends and I are at hand to watch and participate. Bobbing in little boats, we jockey for position around boils of striped bass packed so tightly our flies sometimes ride on their backs. Such boils happen nowhere else. Bluefish that bite off our flies and if we're careless, slash our fingers and circle the stripers. Orbiting the bluefish are the shining mini tunas, false albacore. Greenbacks cleaving the surface faster than anyone who hasn't caught one believes a fish can swim. Bay anchovies erupt in panic sprays. Screaming terns and gulls pick them up, along with sand eels, silversides, bunker herring, and mullet, virtually from the maws of these predator fish. Volleys of gannets fall into the waves as if shot by medieval archers. Sometimes when we squirt the ocean with our onboard hoses, albies, as we affectionately call them, show up in expecting rain bait. Out beyond the albies look bigger tunas, mackerels, marlin, swordfish, coniferous sharks, whale sharks, basking sharks, dorado, ocean sunfish, leatherback sea turtles, porpoises, and whales.
Sounds like a good place to be. From what I've read recently, I think Montauk is being overtaken by tourists. Have you heard that, Ted?
I wouldn't say it's overtaken. It's
okay.
Still, there are a lot more tourists than when I started going there 30 years ago. But it still has a blue collar element. It's not like Cape Cod.
Okay.
There's a lot of working commercial fishermen. It hasn't quite been ruined yet.
All right, good. I'm happy to hear that.
I'm going tomorrow, by the way.
That's great.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of your work, your advocacy work, centers around fish and protecting fish. Is that still a focus for you? Are you spending more time on those issues? Or are you still finding time to do some of this more EARTH Almanac type of writing? What's the balance of your advocacy work and your other types?
I do spend a lot of time writing about fish and fish conservation. I serve as the national chair for the Native Fish Coalition, a nonprofit that advocates native fish, not just game fish, any kind of fish that's native. We have a lot of positions. We are not enthusiastic about stocking non-native trout over wild populations of trout, as is done in almost all states, including mine. I just wrote an article for Downey's magazine on a new type of salmon hatchery on the East Machias River, which is having stunning success while other hatcheries have been failing. Other hatcheries breed inferior fish, and this new hatchery, the Downey Salmon Federation's hatchery, breeds little athletes, and they do this in different ways. Traditional hatcheries will raise smolts, the stage at which young salmon go to sea, in 1 year, which is a really gross violation of natural process. The smolts on natural systems, they start off as parr, small fish, brown marking, that live in the stream for sometimes 3 years, and then they smoltify and go to sea as smolt. So the Salmon Federation stocks parr, and rather than use well water, they use river water directly from the river, so that these fish are exposed to pathogens and fluctuations in pH, and they build up immunities. And then they increase the velocity, which builds up their muscle tone. And they release them in the fall, which coincides with a big eruption of river herring spawn. So they gorge on baby river herring. And they've only been doing this for 8 years. And last year, they had 6 times as many salmon nests counted on the river as it has been the average for the last 20 years. So obviously they're doing something right. It's the only hatchery in the country that's been doing this. And there's one hatchery in England that's done it. That's where they got the idea from, on the Tyne River. And their salmon runs have gone up from something like a couple hundred to 12 or 15,000 a year. Huge, probably the biggest success story in salmon restoration anywhere. I think you might have muted yourself.
I did mute myself somehow.
Okay, I can hear you though.
Okay, it's good. It's great to hear some good news stories. As always, it's a nice balance.
We've got a great question coming in from the audience, and audience members, if you have questions of your own, please feel free to type them in the chat for us. But Donna asked, she said, I'm a nurse psychotherapist working with professionals and families as we enter the winter months of the pandemic. How do we help them reframe winter as a time for growth and exploration and spend more time outside, which will not only help their mental health, but minimize the spread of the virus?
Good point, and it will. Maybe the most important thing is clothing. There's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. So start with boots. And if it's really very cold, you need felt liners in your boots. Or you can get some of the new boots have artificial liners, and it's just as efficient as felt. So start with the good boots, then warm gloves. I use Gore-Tex, which is somewhat waterproof, but very warm, and your hands are warm. And obviously a good hat. Those, if your feet and the head and hands are warm, everything else is going to be okay too, as long as you have a decent winter coat. But do that, you'll be able to feel a lot better about getting outside. And again, look for the good stuff in winter. Read the winter section of the book. Hopefully that will focus you on things you can see no matter where you live in the country, thanks to Connie.
Yeah, I think anyone could benefit from having a notebook back at home that they write down some things that they saw, especially if you have kids. Make it a game, make it a competition if you need to. Just be outside, the air is fresh.
And again, get a track guide so you can track these animals in the snow.
Right.
You might not see them, but you know where they went.
That's right.
There's a question in the chat from Marian Ruhan. She was wondering if you could give us a little bit more information about where to find perhaps a link the article that you were just talking about that you wrote.
The Down East article?
Yes.
It might be out now. I've looked for a link, but I've not seen it. Usually they don't post the links for about a month after the hard copy because they don't want to interfere with the sales. But you can order Down East magazine. It's, up in Maine. It's a great magazine. They'll send it to you. If you're patient, you can hopefully read it online in a month.
What was the name of the article, Ted? Do you remember?
That's a really good question, Connie. The editors always think of the titles.
Right.
They never like my titles. It's something like a new kind of salmon hatchery or something like that.
I've got another question for you. We were talking just now about you with Connie and sort of things to do outside with kids, and you were saying earlier, don't say it's a nature walk. What are some tips that you would have for getting kids to go outside with you and enjoy looking at nature and animals?
We'll think of projects. Okay, maybe build a snowman in the field, but then look for stuff around the field. Broom ball on the ice. You'll be amazed at the stuff you see around a pond in the wintertime or on it. Fishing, ice fishing, not with tip ups because you just sit, but with small jigger sticks that we punch a hole. The fishing rod might be 2 feet long. That's what we do a lot. It's very productive. You catch more perch, and that's what we fish for. It's yellow perch. Much more efficient in the winter for some reason than in the spring. Maybe because a lot of the other fish are dormant. The yellow perch are very active. But as you're doing that, one thing I mentioned, cut a big hole in the ice and just look down. If the sun is right, it's amazing what you can see moving along the bottom. Painted turtles, they're very adaptable to cold weather. They'll be active under the ice. Crawfish. In late winter, the male yellow perch come in waiting for the females to spawn. You see schools of them. Crayfish picking on dead fish, picking up pieces of dead fish. You can even bait them by dropping a dead fish. Water fleas, all kinds of neat stuff. As I mentioned in the book, when you're lying down, every now and then sit up and raise your hand so that other ice fishermen don't think you're dead.
So there's a lovely question from Carol in the chat. She says, it fills me with joy that otters are a success story. Do you have any tips for viewing otters in the wild?
Yeah, you just make sure you go to a lake that's not too busy and sit there. A lot of times they're active in the day. They're very cool animals. A friend of mine who's a wildlife photographer recently saw an otter trying to pull a pickerel out of a hole in the ice, saying having a hell of a time doing it. He found out there was another otter on the other end, pulling in the opposite direction. So, otters, another game they play is sliding, and they'll slide on the snow, slight bank, they'll slide down like a kid will. There's been huge success in otter transplants around the West where they haven't been and they've been restored. Now that trapping is essentially ended, it's very unpopular. It doesn't pay well anymore because of the fur industry. Because of the trapping, it's stopped almost. A lot of these species, especially otters, are resurging. You don't have to cut them much slack to see a huge recovery. Along with otters, fishers, they're coming back big time. Now, when I started with the Fish and Game Department in 1970, there were no fishers. In Massachusetts, they were gone. They've been trapped out. And now in suburbia in Grafton, Massachusetts, we have them in our backyard. Pretty impressive animals. One of their favorite diets is house cats. So another good reason to keep your pet cat indoors.
Well, thank you so much. I think we're about out of time, but I've got one last question, unless another one, someone in the audience has a question they'd like to type, and we'll ask. Ted, I read many years ago a book that had just a terrifying description of commercial fishing. It was James Hamilton Patterson's 7 Tenths, and it really turned me off of wild caught fish.
Right.
But what we were saying earlier about hatcheries, I've also known those aren't great. What do you recommend? Do we just eat the fish ourselves, or I mean, what do we do with wild caught or farm raised? What do you recommend?
Well, it depends what the farm is and where it is. Some of the fish farms in Norway are terrible. They're infested with sea lice, which are wiping out the sea trout as well as the salmon. Really, the best fish farms for salmon are in Maine. They're doing the best job. You shouldn't be afraid to buy farm salmon. You can't buy wild Atlantic salmon. It's illegal. You can buy wild Pacific salmon. I don't think any of it's as good as Atlantic salmon. You can buy farm-raised steelhead, which we eat a lot of. That's fine. And don't be afraid to catch your own fish and eat. There's nothing wrong with that, and they're a lot fresher. One thing. There is a lot of progress being made in commercial fisheries. I don't know if you remember 30 years ago how terrible swordfish tasted. It was really nasty. The reason for that, it was caught on long lines, would die and fester in the water for 3 or 4 days. And it would be put on ice for like a week. When they got to shore, they had put bleach on it to get the green stuff off. And now they're catching swordfish a couple ways. One with buoy gear, which are these big buoys at night. And when the buoy bobs like a bobber, you fish with, they pull it up and they get a fresh swordfish. And that's on the market in 2 or 3 days. And then harpooning swordfish is coming back. A friend of mine went out and got 5 of them a while ago. And those are very fresh. So swordfish is another species that one of the few big ocean fish that is covered very well. And they were 25 years ago, they were almost endangered. Now they're managed well and coming back. So there's good news as well as bad news. The hatcheries, I wish the states would saturate wild trout water with hatchery fish. It breeds disease and compete with the fish. When Montana, in 1974, Montana did an experiment where they stopped stocking trout in a big section of the Madison River. And what happened was, after 2 years, adult trout population had increased by 900% because these stock trout were competing with the wild trout. They were spreading defective genes and spreading pathogen. So I have no problem with stocking trout and non-trout water that we do in Massachusetts. Cape ponds wouldn't have trout if they didn't stock, and they put and they grow, what they can grow, and it's nothing wrong with that. But we have a wild brook trout stream. Trout are in trouble. Superimpose hatchery fish on them is fine. That's one thing our Native Fish Coalition is trying to stop, pushing hard to use hatcheries in the right way. You don't want to ban hatcheries because hatcheries are important for genetics. When you have a fish that is endangered, you can breed them in a hatchery and restock them in viable habitat. We wouldn't have lake trout in Lake Superior, for example, if it wasn't for hatcheries. They were recovered because of hatcheries. So it's all depending how you use them, where you put them.
Well, Ted, Connie, thank you both so much. The book is the EARTH Almanac, and thank you for joining us for this. This has been a fantastic event, and it's so fascinating.
Thank you.
I should mention, by coincidence, there's another book called EARTH Almanac that came out about 2 or 3 months earlier by Ken Kiefer. It's a good book. The major difference is his cost $24.95 and mine cost $16.95.
Bingo.
Well, thank you both so much, and thank you all for joining us. And we hope to see you soon at another Northshire Not Live.
It was
Thanks,
good to be
everyone.
with you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Have
Enjoy
a
the
good rest
book.
of your evening.
Be well.
Thank you. Earth Almanac is a beautiful book. Y'all should read it. Take care, guys.
Thanks.